from the low-income measure that's called the depth of poverty, and in the report card you see it expressed as a percentage point. So on average, generally, people with disabilities who live in poverty are 30% away from the low-income measure. In dollar amounts, so this goes back to what Michelle was saying about, just making it to the poverty line is not lollipops and roses at all. The threshold for a single person with a disability, the poverty line is $27,352. So the gap, that poverty gap, is $7,549 below that amount. That's very significant. In fact, what we found was that a full quarter of people with disabilities have an after-tax income. So after-tax means after they've received any federal or provincial benefits or supplements. 25% of people with disabilities have an after-tax income between $10,000 and $19,000. I mean, in this day and age, with inflation, with rents, the cost of food, and all the other things, it's so little. Severity of disability and the type of severity is an indicator of poverty. So people who have severe or very severe disabilities were more likely to have incomes that fell below $20,000 in 2021. There's no provincial disability assistance program. So those, I'm from Ontario, the Ontario ODS, the Ontario Disability Program. There's programs across the country. There's none in any province that brings people with disabilities up to that low income measure. The only one that does is in the Northwest Territories. But generally, these programs range from $4,000 below the poverty line to $17,000 below the poverty line in New Brunswick. That's outrageous. Here in BC, the disability assistance program is $9,500 below the poverty line. So it was no surprise that surveys done last year found that nearly half of the people surveyed were finding it difficult to meet their basic needs. Nearly half of the people surveyed by Angus Reid talked about the stress and the worry, that they're worried about money and not having enough to meet their needs. So we disaggregated data where we could. We found that 1 in 5 women with disabilities lived below the low-income measure, 17.6% of women. People with disabilities who lived alone were more likely than those who lived in families to live in poverty. So 37.6% of people with disabilities who lived alone compared to 10% of people who lived in families. A huge discrepancy. By age group, almost 1 million of those people who lived in poverty were working aged, and seniors made up the remainder of the almost 500,000 people, but that's still 1 in 5 seniors living in poverty. One of the things that we did see when we looked at the benefits, the poverty rates over time and the depth of poverty over time, we looked between 2013 to 2021. Disability poverty peaked in the year 2015. Almost 1 in 4 people with disabilities lived in poverty, but that slowly started to trend downwards until 2020. So what happened in 2020? We had a global pandemic, large swaths of the economy shut down, and the federal government stepped up in a way that they never have before. They created the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. They topped up every major income benefit program they had, the Disability Tax Credit Program, the Canada Child Benefit, the GST rebate. All of that transferred to people in poverty, children in poverty, and people with disabilities living in poverty. We see that line graph in the report card, it just drops. We know that income transfers to individuals from the federal government make a difference. I do want to note that those programs are not perfect. The disability tax credit, the definition is too narrow, so it's really difficult to get eligibility for that program. The Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, if you didn't make $5,000, so those with the lowest incomes weren't eligible, it wasn't perfect, but it did still have an impact on poverty rates. So we echo Michelle's call and the call for people with for disability without poverty, for the federal government to step up, to act quickly on this day, which is the anniversary of the legislation that got introduced into the House of Commons. We need to pass this bill, and we need to address disability poverty right away. Thank you so much for your time, and I will give back to Ned.